Story 1. No holding single-family home real estate for companies like BlackRock. Sure, invest in building them, but sell them once they are built. Chinese companies, or those from any other country, shouldn't own American homes. Remove some regulations on building as well. Story 2. There needs to be an overhaul of zoning laws. Many places make it difficult to build or build up. As the young flock to urban areas for better-paying jobs, the cost of housing is artificially high due to an artificially low housing supply. This has ripple effects as you move out even into the suburbs. Story 3. Build a large amount of new housing, like an entire Phoenix-sized amount of homes all over the United States. Everything from starter homes to multifamily, to traditional to large homes. Everything. Story 4. National Public Radio did a segment on this. The key is zoning reform. We need more housing in general, and high-density housing like condominiums and apartments in particular. If we can build more general housing, even if it is not single-family homes, there will be a bubble-up effect on full homes pricing as there will be more viable alternatives. To combat the not-in-my-backyard problem that keeps this from naturally happening, we can tie federal funding and aid to communities to zoning reform, apply a federal incentive to resistant communities. To cheapen and bolster construction, we need a lot of lumber, more than America can produce. We need to reduce tariffs on Canadian lumber. Finally, we could provide tax incentives to sell homes to first-time homebuyers and to convert office space to housing so that these things become economically more viable. Story 5. I agree that corporate buying must be stopped, but why don't people understand that wages across almost every essential job must be raised? The same corporations that are buying all the houses are buying everything and controlling wages. Executive pay is a huge problem. There are too many people making too much money at companies where the work is being done by low-paying jobs. The lack of wages for the common man is where we have failed our country. Story 6. It's supply and demand. The supply is fixed or slow-growing because of regulation, supply chains, build time, zoning laws, and the like. Demand is growing due to people coming of age, population spikes due to immigration, and investors opening Airbnb properties. Story 7. We need the same kind of housing expansion that the baby boomers benefited from after World War II. The country does not have enough housing. The country investing in it and putting people to work to build for the betterment of people seems like such an obvious dual positive, so of course it will never happen. Story 8. There are two aspects to this question. There are many places where a middle-class family can afford a house on a 40-hour workweek. They just aren't in New England or the West Coast. The pay cut you take from going to San Francisco to, say, St. Louis is a smaller percentage than the lifestyle cost reduction. The median salary in San Francisco is $104,000 versus $56,000 in St. Louis. But the median housing cost in San Francisco is $1.4 million versus $227,000 in St. Louis. So salaries are half, but the housing costs are 84% lower. In high cost of living areas, limiting speculative housing ownership and short-term rentals would do wonders. These have been some of the biggest drivers of housing costs. Also, addressing zoning issues to allow for more mixed-use and multifamily housing would be beneficial. Story 9. A widespread change in zoning to allow for denser, multifamily buildings. We need a lot of 1- to 2-bedroom condos and townhomes. Those are historically your starter ownership opportunities because they tend to be smaller. But most places make them a challenge to build, so big corporations build large apartments where they can and don't bother with building condos any longer because they can make more renting. I'm 53, and it was possible back in my 20s to buy a small condo on a regular salary. Those days are gone, though. We had a severe overreaction to the real estate bubble in 2008. We stopped building for 3 years and haven't been able to catch back up to demand. Story 10. Build more units. Cut down on regulation costs to build new units. Cut down on not-in-my-backyard restrictions like zoning. Forbid ownership of residential real estate by corporations. Only individuals can own residential real estate, and limit the number of properties an individual can own. This will significantly reduce speculation and investment-driven escalation of property values. Increase workers' wages. They have not kept pace with inflation for a long time. Implement government programs to subsidize first-time homebuyers so that they can more easily qualify for their first home. Story 11. Build more housing. Home prices increase because people have ample money to pay these increased prices. Investment companies buy houses because they know people can pay for the rent and that the housing costs will keep increasing. Building housing at an appropriate level, similar to the level at which we produce food or water, will never come to pass because millions of people have their retirement staked on the hope their house increases at 3% per year. Story 12. Revisit Citizens United. Where money is speech, some have more money and use it to disguise the source of the speech. Right now, wealthy people spend money to convince less affluent individuals to support candidates who claim they're going to cut services to afford tax cuts for ultra-rich households. People don't realize their votes and opinions are being manipulated. Story 13. Folks who are harping on moving because location solves the problem should realize that jobs are concentrated in hubs. Meatpacking farms are in a certain area and financial companies in another area. Even technology companies didn't survive the luxury of working from anywhere and are under a return-to-office mandate. So you need to live where your jobs are. The thing that the government can do is try to eliminate hubs. For physical goods, it will be impossible, but for the electronic economy, this is more possible. So don't always have the next financial technology company in New York and the next technology startup in San Francisco or Seattle. The government should incentivize opening these industries and their employees in other areas. Right now, there is very little incentive for skilled employees to move to a low cost of living area. Companies aren't there, and the government gives zero incentives for the move. Story 14. Financial literacy needs to be taught, and people need to stop trying to keep up with the Joneses. I don't say this in a judgmental way. I work in finance, and you see people who make six figures but can barely pay their bills due to their own overspending on things they don't need, and their priorities are in the wrong place. This would also require accountability and asking for help, which is hard for many people. Story 15. Your location. There are many places in the United States where that is possible. Rural areas with a lot of manufacturing are usually very affordable and pay well to attract people to work there. Story 16. Several things in no particular order. Having fewer people or corporations own multiple single-family homes as long-term or short-term rentals. Wages should be higher. The ability and willingness to move to places where there is an abundance of affordable housing. This is how I was able to buy a house. Story 17. Make the minimum wage equal to when it was first created, factoring inflation into the equation. Right now, minimum wage is so low you cannot afford to even rent a one-bedroom apartment in any state in the entire United States without having government assistance, a roommate, or a significant other. When minimum wage was first created, it was created to be able to support a family of 3 with one income and have enough left over to save for retirement and a house. Story 18. Why do you think it is not possible? I bought in 2023 making $55,000 a year. I only needed $15,000 in cash for a $258,000 house thanks to a state program that covered $10,000 of closing costs payable when the house is sold. I wish I had looked years earlier. I had no idea it was so cheap to buy a home. I thought I needed to have $40,000 saved up. It took me 3 years to save up that $15,000. Story 19. Housing supply goes up. Remove zoning restrictions on single-family homes near large cities. Encourage mixed-use development with changes to property tax laws. And restrict private equity from buying up homes. Community colleges should be public and tuition-free. The same applies to in-demand trade programs. Single-payer healthcare system. It is a major expense for the middle class that would be better off publicly funded. Story 20. Blocking private purchases by huge companies paying way over asking raises asking prices and values. It also increases rent amounts, which raises house prices and values. Banks need to manage monthly payments. Houses are not expensive because of the lack of first-time homebuyers tax relief. You still need a down payment to get the rebate, which is not helping. We have been priced out by malicious practices in the real estate world. A house worth $130,000 is now $280,000, requires $50,000 to $100,000 of work, and they want a $28,000 to $56,000 down payment and $2,000 a month from people who are struggling at $1,400 a month due to everything else costing a lot. Story 21. The actual answer is socialism, but while we work towards that, here are more practical short-term solutions. Ending these suburban-type zoning codes where every single house needs to be a separated single-family dwelling. Middle density is such a pleasure to live in. Think something like row houses. Housing cannot be treated as an investment. Or if it is, only families should be able to benefit from housing investments. If you own more than one, you have to incur a huge penalty, and if you are a corporation, then you are barred from owning residential property. Story 22. Considering that more than half of 35-year-olds and almost exactly half of 30 to 34-year-olds own their own home, I think it already is. Story 23. There is plenty of housing in the United States. It's just not where people want it. There are at least a dozen houses for sale in the town I live in that are under $100,000. Story 24. Zoning reform for mixed-use residential should be the standard. Additionally, waivers should be readily given to transform unused office and retail space into residential areas. All those empty shopping malls should be converted into housing. Uniform construction code reform is needed so you can build with newer materials and methods and are not required to install outdated features. Rent control not only keeps rent affordable but also helps keep property values stable. Increased public housing construction. Living wage. Strengthen landlord and tenant laws. It would be difficult to prevent housing from being used as an investment by large firms because they could create multiple subsidiaries and maximize the number of properties allowed. Story 25. It has 3 parts. When one starts working, recognize the difference between want and need. By what one needs. Save the want for after the needs are met. No one needs a 65-inch TV. No one needs to order in 5 nights a week. No one needs to have a $1,000 phone. No one needs a car with a $600 monthly payment. Have realistic expectations. Starter homes are okay. Homes that need work are okay. Watch online videos and learn how to do things. No one needs a brand new home. For new construction, construction costs are high because land, material, and labor costs are high. Those prices are not going to decrease. But if government regulation and permitting costs were reduced, that would definitely help. Story 26. In order for the middle class to afford a house with a 40-hour job, we need a few things. Housing prices need to take a crash course in meditation and calm down. Wages need to stop hiding from inflation. And mortgage rates need to go back to kindergarten so they stop bouncing around like kids on a trampoline. You could also add a mandatory monthly government gift of pizza and a rented unicorn so that life in a rented apartment doesn't seem so bad. Story 27. For people to accept that if they want to pay $125,000 or less for a move-in ready house, they need to move to a metro city that has 1 fewer cafe or 1 fewer bar they do not go to. Story 28. The root of every issue in America is money in politics. The Citizens United decision has opened the floodgates. There is so much money floating around that the will and welfare of the people are never the priority. Absolutely never. Nobody will solve the affordability crisis because the people who profit from high home prices have the means to stop any legislation that is not in their interests. Story 29. Honestly, the whole property value issue from individual homeowners has got to stop too. There is no reason for my house to nearly have doubled in value since 2011, and wages haven't budged. You know how you make housing affordable? Lower the cost of a house. There is no reason for them to cost as much as they do right now. We are in a generally low cost of living area, and new houses are $400,000. Prior to the pandemic, that same house would have cost you $200,000. But the problem now is you have people who purchase them at the inflated cost and can't tolerate their property values going down. Yeah, well, you know what? I didn't buy my house to make a profit. I bought it because it was cheaper than rent. Astronomical house prices are half the problem, and the people sitting on top of them complaining about their property values is the other half. Story 30. Work remotely and either live in a very low cost of living area or be willing to live with your parents for a couple of years to save 80 to 90% of your income for a down payment, extra for repairs, and a safety net. Then don't expect to live in a mansion or a fancy place in the city. Be okay with an adequate 2 to 3 bedroom in a non-flashy suburb. Maybe move to a low cost of living state. It's all about how badly you want it. Story 31. We need to slowly roll back free trade policy unless there is a compelling reason we cannot make something internally. We need to realize that outsourcing our pollution doesn't actually make us environmentally friendly. We need more substantial union representation, along with sectoral bargaining for blue-collar and some white-collar jobs. We need to overhaul the H-1B visa system to allow migrant workers to move laterally within the country without needing a cumbersome sponsorship process. If you're good enough to work for one company, why can't you move to another in a competitive market? We need to improve conditions and pay on farms and rely less on migrant labor. We need to prevent multinational conglomerates from vertically integrating our supply chain through protectionist policy and antitrust measures. We need to redefine what a good economy is and measure it based on labor force participation, median income, unemployment, underemployment, and include the entire potential labor force. We need to reform welfare to ensure that there is never a situation where someone will lose services by making more money. Services should decline at a slower pace than income increases. We need to protect private sector low-skill labor and ensure there are jobs for all levels of intelligence and attainment. Lastly, we need public health care so both businesses and individuals aren't worrying about what to do if they break an arm.